Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-Commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Buddy, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It is my great pleasure to welcome a guest mentor to the podcast, Ben Leonard from Beast Gear. Welcome, Ben.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. And we were talking off air that your accent is not that strong, even though you're in Scotland. You said you've got basically an international accent, maybe a little bit like me in the sense that I've lived in a few places now and people can never really quite place where my accent is from. And it sounds like yours is similar.
Yeah, that's right. I'm from Northeast Scotland. I was born in Southeast England. My family moved to Scotland when I was like 1. And I have so much family from England, but now I have so many calls every day with people from all over the world. I've developed this sort of mid-Atlantic mishmash accent. So nobody's quite sure where I'm from. The only time people know where I'm from is when I'm watching my local football team or soccer team, if you prefer, and shouting abuse at the referee. And then in which case I do sound very Scottish.
Wow. Absolutely love it. I love the international flavor that we're bringing to the podcast today. So that's bloody awesome. Look, man, the cool thing about you is you're not new to this e-commerce thing. You look super young. You look way younger than me, which damn, that sucks. But you look like you're super young, you look like you're super hungry, super keen, but you've been in this e-commerce game for a long time now, but you've worked across multiple different facets of e-commerce, Beast Gear, retail e-commerce brand, e-com consultant. You're also head of Amazon at Blue Gem Capital Partners. And then you also are the co-founder of Ecom Brokers, which basically you assist people to sell their digital assets and websites for the best price they can get onto the market. But prior to that, you were an environmental engineer. Like, how does someone go from being an environmental engineer to an ecom guru? How does that work?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it brief, but I'll give you the summary. And I like to think that I'm an anti-guru because I hate the gurus. Don't we all hate the gurus?
Well, it depends. If they call themselves a
depends.
guru, then we hate them. If somebody else calls them a guru, maybe it's okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll agree with that. Okay, so yeah, what happened, right? Growing up in Northeast Scotland, nature is everywhere. It was inevitable I was going to get into nature. I studied zoology and then ecology. But Aberdeen is an oil town. So I ended up working in the oil industry, but as an environmental advisor. So I helped oil companies not break the regulations, and I also helped the guys making the regulations to make the regulations. I quite enjoyed it, but I was a tiny cog in a huge machine. I got really sick with a heart condition in 2015, 2016, had to stop work, had to stop my fitness hobbies, and my mental health deteriorated. I needed something to do, and I started a fitness brand as a hobby. That brand was called Beast Gear. I actually sold it. So 3.5 years later in 2019, we were doing $6 million per year in sales, and my wife and I, we were about to have our first kid. We were going to move house. We wanted some more security. I decided to sell, so I sold. And now I'm building more brands. Like you said, there's Ecom Brokers. I co-own Ecom Brokers. When I sold my first brand, the mergers and acquisitions firm that I worked with could have been better. And my accountant and I rescued the deal and then decided to solve that problem in an entrepreneurial way and start our own firm. And I've just written a book about the whole thing. So yeah, lots of stuff going on.
And the cool thing about this is that you're sending the virtual ladder back down again. I love the fact that you're turning maybe some of the challenges that you faced as a brand builder, as a brand owner, and then ultimately as a brand seller. You've turned all of that experience into virtual gold dust, and you've packaged that up not only in the book that you sell, but the advisory services that you provide, and then ultimately brokerage services that you provide. It feels like there's and I almost hate the word synergy, but it definitely feels like there's a synergistic approach to what you're doing here. There's the kind of the content pillar, there's the consulting pillar, and then there's, hey, how can I help people maximize the value of their digital assets pillar that they're already building? So it feels like this all kind of goes pretty hand in glove.
Yeah, pretty much. When I was starting out, I started Beast Gear as a hobby, like a side hustle that might earn me some extra pocket money if I was lucky. And I didn't intend to be in e-commerce because I didn't really understand what e-commerce was. It wasn't my industry. And in terms of, I didn't know that techno idiots like me could build a website on Shopify. I thought building websites was for smart people who knew about coding. And I didn't know I could sell on Amazon. I thought only Jeff sold on Amazon, right? I didn't know that third-party selling was a thing. And so that naivety was actually beautiful. And that's what made me get into entrepreneurship was just this idea of I'll give it a try. Originally, I was going to sell into gyms, and that didn't work out, so I started selling online when I realized I could. So the whole idea of what you said there, of putting the ladder back down, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to champion entrepreneurship, give people a hand up, and dispel the myth that you need experience, or you need a business degree, or you need a ton of money, and that entrepreneurship and e-commerce is for other people. I'm trying to say, actually, if you've got an idea, you got a vision, you got a bit of passion, and you're willing to learn, then you can absolutely do it.
I couldn't agree with you more there. In fact, that's my advice. I get a lot of people coming to me and say, Jace, because I consult to mid-market brand and above, sort of mid-enterprise brands and larger. And what I say is my content is the gateway drug to my services. So in other words, if you start out small and you're a startup and maybe you can't afford me, or you couldn't make use of me because you wouldn't have the resources to implement the things I recommend, then you're on your own to a degree. But I try to also, through my mentorship and exposing the gold dust of the mentorship that I do, which is also free, by exposing that at scale through a podcast, it's trying to give people a hand up instead of a handout, so to speak, and to make it feel and be more accessible to the every person. Like you say, our industry is pretty ecumenical anyway, in the sense that like traditional IT tends to be pretty male dominated, for example, and it feels like it's the bro show a little bit. Whereas within ecom, you get people from all walks of life, you get all cultures, all races, all genders. You get just a really massive cross-section of people working in our industry, and more importantly, welcomed with open arms into our industry. And because, sure, you can maybe go to uni and you can get a commerce degree, but very few places offer an e-commerce degree. And so, sure, you might maybe understand business and you might understand entrepreneurship, but there's no easy way that you can just go and take a few classes and all of a sudden, bang, I exit as an expert in e-commerce. And what I recommend most people do when they're first starting out is exactly what you did, which is if you just start up a simple Shopify website. If you want to learn what e-commerce is all about, you want to learn the nuts and bolts of it, you want to practice, you want to self-educate, there's no better way to do that than to at least have a little bit of skin in the game. $39 a month, $29 a month in the game in terms of Shopify. Maybe you spend a little bit more money on some apps and some plugins, but realistically, the barrier to entry to setting up a Shopify store these days there is virtually no barrier. So all of a sudden now what becomes the barrier is, how can I market? How can I build brand? How can I build community? How can I get out there without having to pay Meta and Google their pound of flesh for every single visitor that comes to my website? How can I distribute at scale? So it becomes more about how can I learn modern digital marketing, and to a degree, maybe guerrilla marketing is probably a better term. How can I learn how to do those things? How can I learn how to build demand? Because historically, like when I started out 20 plus years ago, e-commerce was super hard. There was no Shopify. And so everything about e-commerce was hard. Almost every single e-commerce website was bespoke. It was really expensive. There were platforms like OS Commerce and then latterly Magento and everything else. But because they were all self-hosted and because they were all super complex, even getting an e-commerce website set up was super complex, time-consuming, and expensive. Now, the barrier to actually getting the transactional engine of the business up and running, there's almost no barriers there. So the barrier now is, okay, how can I turn this fledgling business into something that actually can make a bit of money? But my recommendation is, and I'd love to hear whether you agree with this, if you go into it with the mindset of learning first, that's actually the priority, not necessarily making money. If you make money, that's a happy side effect. But if the idea is, look, this is and maybe you start it up as a side hustle, you keep your main hustle, and in the evenings and the weekends, you focus on building up your e-commerce business. But if you have the mindset of learning, then there's no such thing as failure. As long as you're continuing to learn, you haven't failed, even if you don't sell anything through your e-commerce website. But what it's going to do is it's going to start building the muscle. It's going to build the muscle of entrepreneurship. It's going to build the muscle of that e-com capability. And then it's going to put you in good stead once you're ready to take that to the next level and make that your main hustle. Then you're probably going to be in a much better place.
Nailed it. Yeah, I agree with so much of what you said, but also so many things that you've said have set off so many different light bulbs in my head. So I'll go through a few of them. We live in a time where we can pretty much learn and do almost anything we want for cheap or free, barring perhaps brain surgery and a few other very clever things, right? And very clever coding. But and it is that level playing field that took me from inaction to action. Like this idea that I really could just Google to find manufacturers, learn how to calculate my profit margins from YouTube, and learn about marketing from podcasts. And for that reason, I think we're possibly the luckiest generation to have ever lived. People say, oh, what about climate change? What about the state of politics right now? What about pandemics? Yeah, they all suck. But on balance, the level playing field, the access we have to so many things is remarkable and something that and a lot of people just don't take advantage of. That said, I think what's something that I've come across that's quite interesting is because e-commerce is so accessible, because you literally can in a few hours set up an e-commerce website, and because so many of us start these as side hustles as something to try while we're still doing our day job, and I think that is a responsible way to do it. I don't encourage people to just cut everything and try and start a business, because pretty soon you're going to run out of money. But because we do it like that, and many people who do it are doing it because they want to change in their life and they hate their job. When we log into our computers and log into our phones to run our e-commerce businesses, it feels like two things. It feels like a bit of a game, and it feels like an escape. There's nothing wrong with either of those things, except one thing, which is that because of that, sometimes we don't take it seriously. We treat it like a game, and we forget the important business basics that we should all be implementing. Which leads me to another point, which is that you mentioned there earlier about how some of the advice that you're giving and some of the advice that I'm giving is for people and organizations who are perhaps larger. And a lot of people that couldn't necessarily afford our services, but they can afford to hear our content and maybe consume our one-to-many offerings. That said, sometimes I think the larger organizations get too big for their boots and they forget the basics, which is why even now I still, for instance, there's a book I read probably twice a year called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, which, yeah.
And you're speaking my language. I that's one of my favorite business books of all time.
Absolutely. It's a classic, and it doesn't matter if you're doing like 50 grand a year or 50 million a year. It is so worth reading again and again and again, because just learning how this lady should run her pie shop, for anyone listening who hasn't read this book, he uses an analogy of a lady running a pie shop throughout the entire book, and it's beautiful. There's so many lessons to be learned that we can apply to our businesses there. And so it's really important that we never get too big for our boots, and we always come back and apply the classic principles to our businesses. And then just coming to your last point there about how we can set up a business and use it as a learning experience and treat it that way and go into it with that mindset, that's really great. I think that there's two ways to look at it. One is, this is an investment in my education. This is an investment in my future business that's not even necessarily this business, because this might not go well, but I'll learn a ton. And also, at the same time as treating it as an education project, we just want to give it the respect it deserves to take it seriously enough to give it a chance of succeeding. Because so many of us treat it like a side hustle and treat it not like a real big boy grown-up business, that we don't take serious the things that we ought to, like proper record keeping and taxes and accountancy and intellectual property and all of these important things that really matter once you realize, oh, holy cow, this thing's got legs, I need to take it seriously. And even bigger, holy cow, someone might want to buy this one day.
I couldn't agree more. And it's funny you should mention that specific book, because that specific book, when I owned my very first e-commerce pure play business, I'd only been in the industry like less than 2 years at this stage, and started up a e-commerce pure play business with a friend of mine. This is the very, very start of my career. And that book single-handedly caused me to write an operations manual. It was the first operations manual I ever wrote, because it said in this book, if you want to move from basically being a self-employed employee to someone who actually is an entrepreneur and runs a business, then you need to be able to operationalize absolutely everything that you do today. It doesn't mean you're going to immediately turn that over to someone else to do, but if you don't operationalize it, document it, and create a consistent structure around it, you will never be able to get out of working in the business. You will work in that business until you die, and you basically are an employee. And in fact, you actually get it's worse for you, because you've got all the downsides or the challenges of being an entrepreneur and driving business and working all the hours and basically feeling like the business owns you as opposed to you owning the business. You will never get off that treadmill unless you can systematize and create processes that then, when you get to a certain scale, you can start to parcelize and hand those off to other people to own instead of you. Yep. And you will never be able to sell a business if you don't have all of your operations really well. Okay, let's put it this way. You will not be able to sell for a decent multiple if you do not have all your systems and processes in place that then someone else can actually take over and at least maintain at its current level and then build from there. And so that book was pretty enlightening for me. And it really forced me to take a long, hard, honest look at our business and say, okay, are we just a business with an employee of one or two, as in me and my business partner, or are we building a business that actually can be self-sufficient and sustainable? So I think that's such a key thing. And what I oftentimes recommend to people nowadays, and this came out of my experience with Reddit. So I spend a tremendous amount of time on Reddit, answering questions, going to e-commerce threads, and usually 2 or 3 times a day, there will be a post from somebody in the e-commerce thread saying, hey, set up my Shopify store 2 months ago, have got no sales. I've spent $2,000, $1,500, $500, $5,000 on Meta ads, Google ads, whatever. I'm driving traffic, but I've got 0 sales. Can someone roast my site? Basically, go to my website, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And because I see those posts literally every single day, in 9 times out of 10, they're doing so many stupid things, like just the basics. They just don't even, first of all, they don't know what the basics are. And second of all, they're not doing them right. And oftentimes what I'll recommend is go and sit and work as an employee inside of an existing successful e-commerce business. Learn from the best. The closer you can get to the sun, the closer you can get to what you want to be, the faster you can learn. Instead of having to learn everything on your own independently, go and work in a business and steal their ideas. Don't steal in a negative way, steal in a positive way. Emulate them because of the experience you get on somebody else's dime while you're working for them and they're paying you, they're paying your wage, but you're also learning in ways that is difficult to learn any other way.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of people would struggle to get the job because, let's say you're working in forestry, right? You want to start an e-commerce business around your passion. It's unlikely you're going to get a job in e-commerce because you're not qualified, right? But this takes us back to one of the key points that Michael Gerber makes in the book, which is that, and this is actually why the book is called the E-Myth. The E-Myth stands for the entrepreneurial myth, and it is this myth or this idea that we tell ourselves that because you're passionate about subject X or hobby X or industry X or profession X, that you're going to be good at building a business around that. Not necessarily. You might be, but equally you might not be. So what I would say to those people who are passionate about something but have no e-commerce experience, like I had, is and if you can't, you're not going to be qualified to get that job. You're going to have to find ways to learn by doing, but in a way that is within your means, so that you're not dropping stupid amounts of money on ads only to get 0 return. And I think the best way to do that comes back to what we were saying before, which is there is just a wealth of free and affordable information out there online. The problem I think that people have is that it's overwhelming because there is so much and a lot of it is contradictory and it's difficult to know who to trust. And there's not an easy way to answer that for people other than and the two of us can recommend sources that people should go to, but also it's about figuring out who not to trust. If you're seeing repeated Instagram ads from somebody in front of a sports car, that's who not to trust. Right?
Here's a red flag. If somebody is standing in front of a Lamborghini and they're trying to sell you a course, possibly not legit.
I'm a big fan of actually e-commerce Twitter. There's some really smart people there who own e-commerce businesses. They're open about the businesses they own and they tweet on there. That's great. In terms of, you mentioned there that you're going on Reddit and you're finding these people and you're looking at their site and you don't know where to start because the whole thing's a shambles. I'm a huge fan of Donald Miller from StoryBrand and everything he does. And actually, if you just go on YouTube, he's got some great videos where he just breaks down, he calls it the grunt test. Of within 5 seconds, you should know a Neanderthal is why he calls it the grunt test. A Neanderthal should be able to grunt and know exactly what your site is about and how to buy your stuff within 5 seconds. People go look that up on YouTube. Donald Miller grunt test or Donald Miller website layout, something like that. Keep it simple is what I would say.
The KISS method, right? I'm a big fan. Big fan. I think the other thing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. So that person that works in forestry, for example, let's say they're a lumberjack, and let's say they are on the saw all day. They're on a still saw all day, every day, right? I think that even people like that can leverage that existing skill and passion into getting closer to the sun of e-commerce. So like maybe they stop doing forestry, but maybe they go to work or try to get a job with their local still shop that also has an e-commerce site. So they're still leveraging their passion. They're still leveraging their knowledge. They're still leveraging their skill, but they're working on the digital channels. Maybe they're working in digital customer services. Maybe they're manning the live chat that comes in. Maybe they're manning the phones. Maybe they're manning the emails that come in, so that they're starting to understand the life cycle of a customer, right from consideration, questions, getting traffic to the site, overcoming objections, helping people add stuff to their cart, just the nitty gritty basic operational stuff of digital channels. Maybe, not always, but maybe they can leverage an existing passion and skill set, but just tweak it just slightly to where they can stay in their industry, but at the same time, they're building up those digital skill sets and digital muscles commensurate with that.
No, I like that. And if then they want to build a brand around that passion or profession or both, hopefully, and they can position themselves as the face of that brand, that is going to add a ton of authenticity, real organic content showing people the craft of being a lumberjack and how to properly look after your tools and maintain them and how to properly use them and how to fully go about chopping trees down, the right way to do it and how to do it in a way that maintains the integrity of the ecosystem. And all this kind of cool stuff becomes your content, which draws people in. At the same time, you're learning the digital skill set that you need. And it is that authenticity that allows small guys to succeed. Because people come to me all the time and they're like, but Ben, how am I going to compete? I'm starting from nothing. And I'm like, well, you have a huge advantage because you're a speedboat. And the big guys are blundering cruise ships and shipping container shippers. I say it all the time. I consult with large private equity backed families of brands, right? And they want me to help them to be more like the guy on the laptop in the spare room. So I try to. And inevitably, many times, it's not so much that they fail, so they don't start, because there's so many onion layers of bureaucracy that things have to go through. And it ends up on Dave's desk. And at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, Dave doesn't care. But actually, it's the scrappy Street Fighter style solopreneurs and small teams that can absolutely crush it to a point that they get the flywheel spinning so fast that it becomes almost unstoppable. And before you know it, they really are turning over millions and then tens of millions, despite having a small team, because they're speedboats and they're nimble and they're quick. And I love that.
And I think that if you can build community and brand before you try to create a transaction, you are going to be ahead of the game. And so let's stick with our lumberjack theme, okay?
Sure.
So I watch a bit of TikTok. Two of the most famous people I follow on TikTok, because their content is so amazing, they're lumberjacks. Now, why are these two guys so popular? And I'll tell you why each one is popular and uniquely popular. And they've got, I think one's got 1 million followers and I think the other one's got 5 million followers. So we're talking, there is a demand for this content that stands out. The one guy, the reason he is famous is because he is a lumberjack that works in urban areas, and he is capable of felling a tree directly between two buildings without destroying either of them. So he can basically, he will show you the line that he is trying to drop this tree through, and there might only be a meter between these two buildings, and he's got to fell this tree smack between them so he doesn't destroy the buildings. And it's bloody impressive because they have to understand the type of tree, they have to understand the twist of the tree, they have to understand the wind. There's all these different things that they have to basically do to make sure that they don't destroy, or what they'll do is they'll take parts of the top of it out first so that the bushy bit doesn't fall on something, but the main trunk bit can fall down between two things. It's bloody impressive. And that's cool. It's the thrill of getting it right that's super cool. There's another guy, and he's a lumberjack, but what he focuses on, so he's super fit and he's super ripped and he's like super good looking. So he doesn't show you cutting down the big tree. He shows you taking these rounds and using an axe and making firewood out of those. And so he takes his suspenders off and he's got like most of his followers are female, and he's hitting this round with this big giant axe, and women in the comments are going absolutely insane. And these guys, they're building a brand. They're building a personal brand around a passion that they absolutely have. And if at some point in the future, they want it, like the guy that uses the axes, if he wanted to sponsor, or if he wanted to be the rep, if he wanted to have his own signature range of Fisker axes, he'd be able to do that. And I'm sure that he would instantly be able to sell as many axes as he wanted to sell, right? Yep. And I see many passions like this that people have been able to leverage into super interesting content because it's the type of content you don't normally get to see. You don't normally get to see behind the scenes of a lumberjack. That's just not something that the average person gets to see unless they have an uncle that works in it or something like that. And so I think it's this almost behind the scenes type of content that gives us a glimpse into worlds that we wouldn't otherwise get to be able to see or be a part of. But I tell you, it makes me want to go and buy an axe, and it makes me want to go and chop wood because it just looks so cool. And there's another guy, and he's not a professional chef, but he does recipes and he makes food on Instagram, but he's very sexual about it. And again, he's got a massive female following because A, he's super good looking. B, he makes incredible food. C, he shares the recipes and the methods of making his food with his audience. So he's basically empowering his audience to go and try to make the same stuff that he's making on camera. Yeah. And again, if he wanted to make a line of kitchen pots and pans, I'm sure he would sell 1 million of them. So yep. I think that one of the things I think of when I think of people starting a new brand is how can we start embedding ourselves into existing communities on the internet around the passions that we already have so that we're actually starting to build a brand and to build an audience before we ever need to monetize them.
Yep. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that. But there's another way as well that doesn't fly in the face of what you said. It complements it. Because I think for some people listening, they'll find the idea of building an audience like that intimidating because it seems like it's okay for these lumberjack guys who've got 1 million followers, but where do I start? Unfortunately, guys, the answer to that is consistency. It's the compounding effect of showing up every day and doing it consistently for a long time before you start to get any traction, and then eventually there'll be an inflection point and you'll get a hockey stick effect. However, while you're doing that, and you're doing that and you're doing it every day and you're grinding away and it feels like you're not really getting anywhere, you got to keep going. But while you're doing that, there are things you can do that have more of a return on commitment and a return on effort, if you like, which is this: showing up one-to-one in communities, like you were saying earlier, right? You're showing up on Reddit and helping the e-commerce community, right? With Beast Gear, my first brand, I was showing up in CrossFit groups on Facebook, and I was providing helpful, compelling, engaging, useful, free information to the groups. I was becoming a liked member of the community so that when it was time for me to launch products, and I was like, hey, I'm launching this product. I'm launching it at like less than half price. I want to get some buzz out there in some gyms. Anyone who's interested, please just reply to this post. I'd wake up in the morning and there's 500 replies because of the goodwill that I've created in the group and the relationship that I formed with the admins and all that good stuff. So that, I didn't really have an audience per se. I was just showing up in a group. If at the same time I had been building an audience like these lumberjacks are, it wouldn't have been TikTok at the time, then I would have been like even more successful. I didn't do that. With the benefit of hindsight, I should have done. As someone who's now trying to build a bit of a personal brand, if you like, in the e-commerce space, I understand how difficult it is and sometimes demoralizing to show up every day and it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere, but you just got to keep showing up. Some people hate him. I love him. That's what Gary Vee tells us to do. And he also tells us jab, right hook, which basically means give and then ask for the sale. You got to give tons of value, show up, position yourself as an authority and as somebody who knows what they're talking about and whose brand is viewed as an authority. And then people will know and trust you and buy from you.
Man, that is such gold. And I can use myself as a prime example of that, where I've got 276 episodes now produced of my podcast, and I still have a relatively small listenership. It's relatively small still. I'm definitely not Joe Rogan. I'm definitely not going to be able to quit my day job anytime soon and rely on podcast sponsorships. But if I was doing it primarily to monetize my audience, then that would get really depressing and I would give up. Yep. But the reason I'm doing it is primarily to open up the opportunity to have conversations with people like you that I would not be able to have that conversation any other way. So there's a lot of people that I respect in this community. There's so much knowledge and so much gold dust out there. But if I didn't have a podcast and I just messaged via DM on LinkedIn and I said, hey, can we grab a virtual coffee for 15 minutes and shoot the breeze about e-commerce? 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be no, because there's no real tangible benefit for them or potential benefit for them. And so it's really hard to open doors cold. But when you have a podcast that becomes semi-well-known, and again, I'm not famous by any stretch of the imagination, but just the fact that I now have 270-something episodes out there shows that I'm committed to this, shows that it's real, shows that it's important to me, shows that I'm passionate about it, and I'm not going to throw in the towel. And then people look at that and I can point them to that podcast and I can say, hey, look, if you want to see what I'm all about, go and check out my content, go and check out my podcast. I'd love to have a chat with you about these topics. And they know that you're legit, that you're not fly by night. And that has opened the door to conversations, speaking at conferences. People find my podcast, they go, wow, this guy actually produces some good content. We'd love him to come and speak at our conference. Or partnerships, tech partnerships, agency partnerships. It has opened doors that are so independent, and it's brought benefits that are so independent of the direct commercial cash in the bank benefit that I would never stop. And the second thing is, my focus of my podcast is first for me to learn. It's sure, I'm trying to share what I learn with an audience, but first it's a priority for me to continue to learn and to continue to sharpen my sword. And so I think the more that we can approach anything we do with an open, creative mind, with the goal being learning first, and then the commercial part's going to take care of itself. It's going to look after itself if you have good intent. And it's funny you mentioned Gary Vee, because my content journey started with Gary Vee. Cool. I started creating content consistently because I got sick of hearing Gary Vee harp on in my ear, if you think you're a fucking thought leader, then why don't you put your thoughts out there, let them be critiqued by the market. And if they're good, then you will know. If they're not, you'll get valuable feedback. And so he said, pull finger, put your thoughts out there. You can't call yourself a thought leader. You can't be a thought leader if you're not sharing your thoughts. And so he just kept hammering that until I finally was like, okay, I'm going to start putting my thoughts out there. And I was an employee at the time. So it wasn't like I was trying to build a brand to sell my services. I didn't have any services to sell.
I love that. And so you've done it through a podcast. And I recently finished my book. And it's pretty much that. It wasn't quite Gary Vee that gave me the kick up the arse to do it. But it was a similar thing. I was sitting in a conference in early 2022. And there was a guru on stage. And he
funnily enough,
he was mesmerizing the audience. And I had to pinch myself because they were eating out the palm of his hand. And I was sat there going, that's not that impressive content. I've done that. I was doing that in like 2017. Okay. And I was like, show me what you've done. Show me your brands. Show me your evidence. Show me your clients. This is all theory, smoke and mirrors. Like, you could do this, you could do that. Here's an idea for how this could be done. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody loved it, right? And he's so well known and liked in the space. And I've met him. He's a nice enough guy, but I did some digging, right? And he did have an e-commerce business, but it was just generic tat, and he got out at the right time. And I was like, just quietly mulling over to myself on the flight home about that. And I thought, I've got to come out of stealth mode. I'd be open about Beast Gear and what I'd done on podcasts and stuff, but I was like, I need to actually really come out of stealth mode and do something. And it wasn't a podcast. I still might do a podcast, but it wasn't a podcast. It was gonna need to be like something that I could hand to somebody. And I decided to do the book. What frustrated me was how long it took. That was spring 22. It's now nearly October 23. But yeah, so it was the same thing. It was this idea that if you want people to take what you have to say seriously, you have to do something, whether that's a podcast or a book or some other platform. Yeah, and so I did.
Here we are. And what I love about this is, by the way, is your book actually officially released yet, or is it about to be?
October 10th.
October 10th. Wow, coming up very soon. And where will it be available? Just so that everybody can...
Everywhere. Amazon, all Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all these things. 99.9% of people will get it on Amazon. Yeah, it's called Quit Stalling and Build Your Brand.
Wow, I love that. I love how like between the eyes that is.
Yeah, Quit Stalling and Build Your Brand. Subtitle, you don't need an MBA to crush it in e-commerce.
Wow.
If it's not October 10th yet, go to quitstallingbook.com, sign up there. You'll get a free chapter and a little mini course and a bonus e-commerce hacks ebook. And it's already October 10th. Go get it on Amazon and then go to quitstallingbook.com anyway to get all those bonuses. The free chapter will be useless by that point because you'll have it in the book, but the other bonuses are good. Yeah.
Wow. Ben Leonard, what a story. I love that your passion is palpable. Like, it's, even though we're separated by a long way on other sides of the world and in completely different time zones, your passion is absolutely palpable. You've clearly got a good head on your shoulders. You've obviously exited with a pile of cash, so it's not like you need to do this to make a living. You're clearly doing this because you genuinely love it and you genuinely want to help people by sending the ladder back down again. And what I always think is the more that I can share, people can make different mistakes than I made, right? There's this hive mind mentality that I think of, which is I learned from lots of amazing people in every career that I've had. So I worked in hospitality long before I was ever in digital. I learned from some of the best in the industry. And so I didn't make the mistakes they made. I made different mistakes and I learned different things. And I feel that you and I have a similar approach, which is we both believe that a rising tide floats all boats. It will, if we all execute at a higher and better level, that will increase trust on the part of consumers in e-commerce. That will grow the market and the pie for e-commerce. And you and I, people like you and I, will always get ours. We'll always get our pound of flesh to be able to survive and pay our bills and all that sort of stuff because we're good enough to be able to do that. But the reality is, if we want to expand the opportunity for all, then we have to try to create an environment where people are making new mistakes instead of all the old ones again. And so I think by sharing what we did right and what we did wrong and what we would do differently next time around, I think by doing that, then that sets people up to at least not have to just not to reinvent the wheel, basically.
Yep, totally. And I made and continue to make so many mistakes. And if anything, I give myself a harder time for mistakes now because I'm like, come on, Ben, you should know better. But I guess each time there are new mistakes, right? And that's okay. I think part of being an entrepreneur is learning to be okay with mistakes. There comes a point where you need to make sure that you limit your downside. I think one of the great things about entrepreneurs is we take risks, but also I think entrepreneurship used to be weird, but now it's sexy and it's something that people want to do, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, I think there's quite a few famous entrepreneurs who talk about how amazing it is to be an entrepreneur and take these incredible risks. It's okay for you to say because it paid off for you. But for Joe Bloggs, who's got a mortgage and bills and a family and a job, taking a reckless risk is really not a good idea. So I think risk taking as an entrepreneur is great, but we've got to make sure that it is a calculated risk. And for that reason, sure, we got to be kind to ourselves and let ourselves off when we make mistakes, but we got to learn from them and make sure that we mitigate the downside next time around. And yeah, I think that the making entrepreneurship real is part of our role, I think.
Yeah, and there's extreme survivorship bias in all the content that's out there because the reality is most people don't normally talk about the shit that didn't work. They talk about the stuff that worked, and that's what they become famous for. They become famous for the sometimes serial entrepreneurs. They're not successful until the fifth or sixth go. They have 4 or 5 failures behind them, and then the fifth or sixth one goes off because of all the learnings they had, and they start from a better place. And that's the thing they become famous for. But you don't see the blood, sweat, and tears, the crying, the going to your wife and saying, I spent $20,000 on this venture that didn't work out, or this investment that didn't work out, or these are very real things. These are very real conversations, and these are very real consequences of going all in on something, burning the boats, and not having any downside risk mitigation.
And I would love it if more entrepreneurs would talk about the stuff that didn't work. I mean, I still want to hear the amazing story behind the success, but I want to hear the stuff that didn't work. And there's another level of that aversion bias, which is not only do the people who made something work not tell us about the stuff that didn't work, you've got all the people who did all the stuff that didn't work and never found something that worked. And
100%.
Their experiences are still valuable for us to learn from. And they are still valuable resources for us all, but we'll never get to hear because they've gone back to their day job.
I'm going to tell you one of my biggest mistakes in my career, and this will lead into what you're doing now, how people will get a hold of you, and why what you're doing is important. So this is going to dovetail nicely. So I'm going to be very transparent, probably more transparent than I've ever been on any other podcast episode before. So my first e-com business, my first pure play business, we rocketed. Like when we first started, it went from nothing to nearly $1 million a year in revenue in under 2 years. Like it was like the classic success story. We were paying 5 cents a click for Google ads. We were one of the first in the game in our category. We were direct importing from overseas. We were cutting out all the middlemen. We were warehousing locally in New Zealand. We were shipping direct to the customer. We were undercutting the market when we first started by anywhere from 25 to 50%, and we were still making crazy margins of our own. Now, what happened is that the market we were in, which was memory cards, remember the old memory cards that you put into phones and cameras? And when we first started out, memory cards were 32 megabyte, not gigabyte, megabyte. And they were selling for $650. And the margins were insane, right? And so we had basically our supply chain was our moat, right? because we were effectively parallel importing against the local distributors and importing for way less than what they were buying for. Therefore, we could sell it for less than what they were selling for. Plus, we were selling direct to consumer. So happy days, right? And digital advertising was dirt cheap. So we had great organic rankings. We paid almost nothing for Google ads. So we were ranking in both. And it was just easy. And the interface for running Google ads at that time, an idiot could have done it. In fact, I was that idiot. I was doing it. I did everything. I did all the technical stuff because I had worked for an agency for a year. And I learned a whole lot of the tricks of the trade. And then I started that business with my friend as a side hustle. But what happened was we didn't sell soon enough. And we didn't sell when things started to plateau a little bit. We waited too long. We thought the market would come back. And what was happening behind the scenes in the market that we probably didn't pay enough attention to was that prices for memory cards were dropping precipitously fast. Plus, many retailers and manufacturers of phones and cameras were starting to give away memory for free as a sweetener deal. They were selling it as a bundle. Okay, cool. You get this memory card for free. You buy a Canon 320D or whatever the hell it is, and you get this memory card for free. You buy the cell phone, you get the memory card for free. So memory, all of a sudden, in most cases, was being given away for free. And all of a sudden, how can we compete with free? Very difficult to compete with free. But at the peak, if we would have sold, we actually did try to sell in the end, and we ended up selling for just the value of the inventory that we had, which was just like, it's so depressing to think about it now. It's crazy. But you have to know when to start a business, but you also have to know when to sell a business. And we executed perfectly on the timing of when we started our business. And I think we executed really well. We both kept our day jobs until the business was doing well. Then we got an owned warehouse. Then we got an office space. We did it very systematically. And we took a very low salary for ourselves just to be able to pay ourselves enough money to survive. So I think we did a lot of things right. But what we didn't do was exit right. And so therefore we didn't extract as much value out of the business as we could.
Yep.
We tried diversifying in the end, but when your brand is flashcards.co.nz, that's your brand name. Hard to diversify your catalog, right? And so there's a lot of lessons in there, but I think that leads very nicely into the effectively digital asset broking that you're doing nowadays. And maybe you can speak a little bit to that.
Sure, yes. I co-own ecombrokers.co.uk. So we started in the UK, but we work all over the place, as far afield as Mexico and New Zealand, in fact. And we got a deal director, John, who sits in Chicago as well. So what happened there was the M&A firm that I worked with to sell my first business made a catalog of errors, one of which would have cost me $500,000 if we hadn't spotted it. My accountant, Alison, and I worked together to get things straight. She's been involved in mergers and acquisitions for 30 years. She started out in pharmaceuticals, and now she owns the best e-commerce accountancy firm in the UK. So and she was my accountant. So it made sense for us to set that up. And so now we help people who own e-commerce businesses to plan their exits. And these are generally physical products e-commerce brands that are selling through their own website, Amazon, sometimes a little bit of Etsy. Sometimes they're on sort of wholesale platforms like Tundra and Fair, for instance. And a lot of the European marketplaces as well. So like Ball, Cdiscount, Allegro, this kind of thing. Sometimes, though, we sell businesses that are SaaS businesses and agencies, but mostly it's physical products e-commerce. And it's been fascinating, man, because 2020 was insane. A lot of people with really rubbishy businesses got really rich. And more power to them. Good for them.
Perfect timing.
I sold too early. No, that's not fair. I'm not being fair on myself. If I had a crystal ball and known about the pandemic, I would have sold too early. I sold at the right time for me and my family. The pandemic still helped me out in a way because it helped me make sure that my earnouts were hit, which was nice. The other thing that helped get those earnouts hit was the flywheel that I'd already built into the business. And then, of course, things changed. 2022 was a difficult year. We were fine, really, because we're a lean team and we leverage a lot of Alison's accountancy firm. And we're quite happy to sit and wait for the right deals and help the right people to plan their exits. And things are picking up now. Multiples will not reach what they were before. But oftentimes people come to me and they say, "So Ben, what are the multiples?" I'm like, that depends.
Yeah.
Multiple for your business is not going to be the same as the multiple for Jason's business. Let me give you an example. We sold a business not that long ago, and two businesses in relatively quick succession, which makes it a fair comparison for the market. And they were both in the exact same category, selling virtually the same stuff. One, and their SDE was really similar. They were both doing something, it wasn't huge, they were like 300 grand SDE. And one had a really strong brand identity with raving fans. They were producing fantastic content. They had a means to communicate with those fans through email and social media and chatbots and things like that. and they had a pipeline of products coming down the line. Another one was just selling stuff with a label on it. They didn't really have a brand identity. They didn't have a growth pipeline. Which one do you think had the higher multiple?
It's a
Right.
pretty
And
much
yet,
a no-brainer, isn't it?
yeah, and yet people will ask me, what are multiples? It depends. I need to take a look at under the hood of your business. They're between 2 and 6, generally speaking, of your SDE or your EBITDA, whichever way you want to play it. And other than that, it depends. I've seen businesses that on the face of it have got good SDE, but the year-over-year growth isn't great, and the SDE margin is not great, and there's not a huge amount of growth in the pipeline, and so it's going to be 2 to 2.5. On the other hand, I've seen smaller businesses, but they're actually much more exciting from a point of view of profitability, growth, intellectual property, true brand identity, and they're going for like high 5.6, 5.7. That's really fun, and that's really exciting. The buyers are getting back into action again. Some of the huge private equity-backed aggregators have been in a pickle. Benetago filed for bankruptcy. There's rumors that Perch are in trouble. Well, Perch are in trouble. There's rumors.
Thrasio, a whole bunch of them in trouble.
Yeah. On the other hand, there's others that are doing really well because they watched the big boys make the mistakes and they have decided to actually learn how to operate e-commerce businesses. Or indeed, they actually, rather than being financial guys, they were like, oh yeah, we can run e-commerce businesses. It's not easy. It's a game, right? It's just some idiot putting stuff on Amazon or running some Shopify site with Facebook ads. They're actually e-commerce guys first that have raised the money to roll these digital assets up. And many of the buyers actually are not just aggregators. They're actually other e-commerce businesses. They're doing strategic purchases that make sense for them. And that's really cool. And that's really refreshing. So it's a fascinating space.
Wow. Absolutely love it. And so that's where you're spending a lot of your time now that you've finally finished up this great work of art known as your book, which is fantastic. Now, if you were to give, you already said, look, start up your own e-commerce store, have skin in the game, learn new things, all that sort of stuff. If you had one or two tips, somebody's looking at us, they're listening to this podcast, they're going, man, I like the idea. I watched that guy, Jason. I know he's moved to Mexico. I know he's a digital nomad. I'd like to do that. I think e-commerce might be a way to unlock that opportunity for me too. Where do I even start? What are your top one or two tips? Someone thinks, hey, I'd like to dip my toe in the e-commerce waters. Where would I start?
Okay, I'll try and keep it succinct with some actionable stuff. I think the first is to make sure that you give yourself a dose of realism about whether you have the capital. You're gonna need at least 10 grand minimum to start these days, right? Admittedly, I did not start with 10 grand. I started with about 2.5, and then over the course of my business, I received some loans. I had to inject capital to keep that thing going, right? Cash flow, all that fun stuff, right? Those are things that come along with e-commerce. But basically, have a real conversation with yourself. Can you afford this within your means? And only gamble what you can afford to lose. If it all goes tits up, that 10 grand's gone. Are you okay with that? That's the first thing. The second thing is, and this is just my perspective, is I believe that if you're going to do this, it needs to be something that you're going to get out of the bed in the morning really jazzed up to. And you're going to be jazzed up to work on it during your lunch hour, during the evening, during your weekends, during times you're really supposed to be doing your day job when you're hoping your boss doesn't notice. It's got to be something you love. So it needs to be something that you're passionate about, where you can legitimately produce quality products that will solve real problems for your people who you really deeply understand, and therefore you can build a brand for them and for yourself. I'm a huge fan of the 80-20 rule. I'm sure everyone listening knows what that is, except in one area: quality product. When it comes to product, I believe in the 100-0 rule. You got to have an awesome product. You can't outmarket a crap product. So that's my views on generally what to think about when you're starting.
That is some genius advice. I was very lucky. And another thing I've never talked about on my podcast, man, you're bringing some good stuff out of me today. Some serious vulnerability happening here. But I was very lucky in my first startup. My business partner, he was pretty well off, and we were both running the business from our bedrooms initially. We both had our day jobs, and he was making significantly more money in his day job than I was making in mine. And he funded us. He gave us the cash flow to get started. He kept dumping money in until we became self-sustainable, and we were growing so fast that he had to keep putting money in to fuel the growth. Like we had to keep raising the amount of inventory we were holding because the demand was going up so fast. We actually had to just we had to buy more inventory than we had in cash flow We were dumping 100% of the cash flow back in the business. We weren't even taking a salary at this stage, but it was still growing so fast. We're out of stock on like half of our inventory most of the time because that's how fast this thing's growing. And he just kept plowing more and more. I think he ended up putting something like, in the first year, I think he put 50 grand or so out of his own pocket into the business just to keep up with the growth rate. I was just very fortunate that I had a business partner that saw the rocket ship that we were on, was willing to take a punt on that and was willing to keep funding the business until we got to a little bit of an equilibrium where when we were pouring all the cash flow back in the business, we could actually keep up with the demand and with the growth. But to your point, I think that people oftentimes go in this with $1,000 in their back pocket and they think, oh, isn't that going to be easy? It's going to cost me $100 a month for Shopify and a few apps, and it's going to cost me, it'll just be drop shipping, so I don't need to hold any inventory. So I'll create an integration, and I don't even need to register as a business yet, so I can keep costs really cheap. And okay, I'll go out and spend $1,000 on some Facebook ads and we'll be golden, right? The field of dreams, which is build it and they will come, that ended in e-commerce. I don't think that really ever existed in e-commerce, but if it did, it was a long time ago. That doesn't really exist anymore. That's not the way that it works.
Correct. I couldn't agree more. And I think you mentioned dropshipping there. I don't want to hate on dropshipping too much because I think it does have a place for testing the water, and especially somebody who perhaps really is confident that they can make this work, but they simply don't have the money to hold inventory yet. I think it has a place as a foot in the door. I don't think it forms the basis of a legit big boy grown-up business that somebody's going to want to buy in the future. Somebody might want to buy, but not for a high multiple. So I don't want to hate on it, and I know that some people do make a success out of dropshipping, but I don't think it's the long-term play. I think for some people, it makes sense as a starting point.
And I would say equally the same about printing on demand. I consider that a variant of dropshipping, and those sites that I was referring to on Reddit, probably at least half of those are print on demand websites. And a lot of them are AI. They've plugged AI in so that the designs are actually being generated by AI as well. So it's really, they think it's mostly like a business in a box, and that doesn't really exist. And so you got to walk through this thing with people and walk through what the challenges are and what the opportunities look like. Listen, Ben, this hour has absolutely flown by. Super appreciate your knowledge. Super appreciate you coming on. I almost didn't know what to expect when we jumped on this call. So glad that we did. You've been doing this a long time. You came from not the e-commerce background, and then you did all the hard yards. You did all your research. You did all your homework. You got bruised and battered along the way, but ultimately you were successful. And that is super inspirational. I know it's super inspirational to me. It will be inspirational to my audience. I super appreciate your time. If people want to get a hold of you, they want to find out more, what's the best way? Hook up with you on LinkedIn, go to your website. Obviously, I'll put the link to Ecom Brokers, which is just ecombrokers.co.uk. I'll put that in the show notes. How do you like people to get a hold of you?
Sure, yeah. I'm super approachable. All my social media handles are at Ben Leonard Pro. LinkedIn, just search my name, Ben Leonard. You can email me, ben@benleonard.pro or ben@ecombrokers.co.uk. And if you want to get the book, it's quitstallingbook.com, or just search on Amazon if it's after October 10th for Quit Stalling and Build Your Brand.
Wow, absolutely amazing. Now, we're at the time where, and I don't normally do this on guest mentorship episodes, but I'm going to do it for you because I think you're amazing and we have a great conversation. I normally, on my other episodes, the tech episodes and B2B episodes, I turn the microphone over to my guest and I let them ask me one question, any question they like. Can be personal, can be professional, can be anything you like. So, Ben Leonard from Ecom Brokers, what is your question for me today?
Jason, what was the moment that you realized that inside you were supposed to be an entrepreneur?
Man, that is such a great one. It was really when so I worked with an agency before I started my online pure play business. And once we started that business, it was a side hustle. And it was up for, I don't know, the site was up for, I think, 2 weeks or something before we made the first sale. But man, when that first sale came through, and it was only one, and I think it was a $300 memory card or something like that. And it was for only one product. The euphoria that I felt from that, I was like, I want to continue chasing that same euphoria forever. And it was like it just made all the pain. It made all the blood, the sweat, the tears, the stress, the late nights. It made everything worthwhile in that moment. If we worked out the amount of hourly rate that we got up to that point based on that one sale, it would be measured in pennies per hour, I'm sure. But it created such a sense of pride in accomplishment. And I'm just such a firm believer that the harder, the higher the barrier, the harder we have to stretch, the greater the sense of accomplishment. And because I knew how hard it was to secure that sale, my God, did I appreciate that customer. My God, did I appreciate that one sale, that couple $100 that came in. It validated that we had a genuine, real business on our hands. Yeah. We had a real offering that somebody saw value in, and we shipped out. So we always, from day one, we created a business model whereby we could ship up until 7 p.m. at night. Nice. My business partner was literally just around the corner from the Christchurch airport, and the courier post depot was at the airport. So he could go and he could drop off the last Santa Sack bag of parcels to the airport at 7 p.m. so that people would get their parcels the next day. And so we packaged it up, and he rushed straight down to the airport, and out it went. And they got it the next day. And we used to get emails every single day. How did you get this here so fast? We're on the other side of the country, and we ordered it like 6 p.m. at night, and it's here at 9 a.m. in the morning. How the hell did you do that? And it's those little micro wins that just make it. I can remember very specific instances with happy customers, and they would ring or they'd email, and some of them turned into like very loyal customers that bought many thousands of dollars from us over time. But yeah, it's that first order. It was literally that first order was the one that has stuck with me ever since.
First order feeling is incredible. A stranger on the internet wants to buy my stuff.
Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, totally.
Ben, you're absolutely the man. I wish you every success with your book. I'll put the link to everything in the show notes. And I can't wait to speak to you again soon, my friend.
Thanks. I've absolutely enjoyed this.
If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.